Who didn't love the PlayStation Portable? It was Sony's answer to Nintendo's monopoly on the handheld market. While it never reached the heights of the Game Boy family or the DS commercially, the PSP sold an admirable 80 million systems plus in its lifetime. Sony had to bring the heat to Nintendo, and they planned to do so with a list of exclusive 3D titles, the first of which shown to the public being Death Jr. This one's developed by Backbone Entertainment. These guys used to be known as Digital Eclipse in the 90s and the early 2000s. They're comparable to Traveler's Tales actually. They made competent licensed games and specialized in the handheld market. They actually made Spyro, Season of Ice and Season of Flame on the Game Boy Advance, as well as Rayman Hoodlum's Revenge, all solid spin-offs in their respective series that wouldn't make it on any of the worst of lists.
Except for maybe Season of Ice, but then again, we know it can get a lot worse for Spyro. Let's not kid ourselves.
Funnily enough, speaking of Spyro, Death Jr. came about from experiments conducted with an engine backbone originally created for a Spyro spin-off starring Agent 9. This game was to be the beginning of a multimedia franchise in a similar vein to how Star Wars Shadows of the Empire was marketed. Figures were made by Gentle Giant, and there were 2 volumes of comics released by Image, written by Gary Whitta. I'll come back to the comics here in a bit. In the world of Death Jr., the Grim Reaper treats his job much like the average 9 to 5. You have to imagine being Death would get boring pretty fast. Not many people to talk to, I'd imagine. Death is happily married to a very much alive woman, and together they have a son, Death Jr., or DJ for short. DJ idolizes his father and constantly tries proving his worth as his successor, usually to disastrous results for everyone near the boy. Death, while stern, is, unsurprisingly, a patient man, and after several school transfers, he gives DJ one more chance at this new school not to mess up. To say this game is obscure is an understatement. From what little information about the game is online, it allegedly sold less than 25,000 copies. Considering this was to be the PSP's killer app, I would say it was an obvious failure in terms of sales. I blame the marketing. I never once saw a commercial for this game back in the day. I actually discovered Death Jr. thanks to MTV Video Mods. Back from 2004 to 2005, MTV2 aired videos using music from artists such as Sum 41, The Foo Fighters, and Franz Ferdinand. One of these videos was My Chemical Romance's 2004 single, I'm Not Okay, animated to Death Jr. No joke, this music video has been burned into my memory since I watched it on TV all those years ago. With the basics and the nostalgia out of the way, guys, I'm Colt at Save Your Game, and this is Death Jr. The game begins with DJ and his friends arriving at the Museum of Supernatural History for a school trip. Separating from the class, the group soon finds themselves in trouble when DJ unlocks a box to impress Pandora, which just so happens to hold the soul of his uncle Moloch. Moloch, with an army of demons, steals DJ's friends' souls and kidnaps Pandora. It's up to the Son of Death to save the day and fix the problem before his father finds out. Immediately, I'd like to point out how great the graphics look for a PSP game in 2005. Models and environments not only look good, the art style is translated perfectly to 3D. The art style reminds me of Tim Burton, while the gameplay is more reminiscent to Ratchet & Clank actually. While much of the game's design is structured around platforming, combat has a heavy focus. Jumping into the first level, and we already have a good variety of the enemy types we'll be facing. We're only facing troopers, walkers, and some bats here, but they're ruthless in how they attack you. Luckily, DJ knows how to fight back, and I make short order of Moloch's pawns. Grabbing the first piece of Seep Soul will then teleport us back to the museum where you find Smith and Weston.
DJ! Hey! Wow! We were looking all over for you in the bathroom stalls. Inside, locked, but we were looking for you nonetheless. So good to see you.
Together, the 3 of you begin working towards saving your friends. Stig Martha and Dead Guppy are in the same boat as Seep, meaning you'll be collecting the pieces of their souls as well. The basic concept is that these level portals DJ jumps into throw you into a different part of town frequented by DJ and his friends. You'll fight through enemy hordes, feeding the souls you collect from them to the various eye gates throughout the level. Your ultimate goal in every level is to reach the fragmented piece of your friend's soul, which is represented by a puzzle piece. There are a couple of boss fights in the game as well, and none of them are messing around. They actually keep things fresh, and none of the boss fights are repeats, which actually is really nice. While initially, enemies may overwhelm you with ranged and speed attacks, bringing the fight to them is your best bet. You'll have to get good at weapon swapping to be the most effective. You'll begin to feel unstoppable. It's actually a lot of fun, and the enemy count reaches into the hundreds in some levels. Sadly, Death Jr. suffers slightly in the control department. You'll fight the camera as enemies circle behind you, and while tapping the left bumper will orient the camera behind DJ, it's no replacement for a free camera. I digress though, you can't expect much better with one analog stick. Luckily, holding the left bumper will actually turn it into a free camera. You can look around with it, but you can't move at the same time. Holding the right bumper will make DJ strafe and lock onto the nearest enemy in front of you. This lock-on is a necessity against the bosses. Coming back to boss fights, some of these bosses are the most unforgiving enemies in any video game. This giant eye, for example, they leave all these ammo crates around the pit's entrance because the developers knew you would need it. Once you've gone down the hole, there's no digging your way out of this one. Half of the bosses have their own level portals and the other half are at the ending of levels. What this means is that any of the bosses at the end of the levels, once you fight them, if you're not prepared and you lose all of your continues, it's game over, back to the beginning of the level. You have to restart. This is, in all reality, a minor nitpick. You can get back to the boss fights fast enough, you just have to trudge through the level again. But if you've done it before, you can do it a lot faster the second time, I'm sure. Weapon variety is nice. DJ sports pistols, a shotgun, a freeze gun, a chain gun, a freaking lightning gun, among others. Probably the most famous weapon in the game is the C4 hamster. A lot of fun to use and super effective against enemies and bosses alike. Death Jr. is borderline addicting. Every time I put the game down, I feel the urge to play it for just a little bit longer. The combat and platforming is not only legitimately gratifying, it has a weight to it that many third-person games of this style lack. DJ's moveset feels intuitive, and the fluidity achieved here amazes me. In every level, you'll find widgets, this game's currency, that you'll give to Smith & Wesson for weapon upgrades. These can range from your pistols getting a better rate of fire to having one C4 hamster implode while the second explodes. These upgrades will help you through your journey, but they're by no means necessary, which is good. They're there to mess around with, but you don't have to go out of your way to collect widgets. So if the game is good, then why didn't it sell well, you might be asking? Death Jr.'s true detriment is that it suffers from a lack of identity. While I've always loved the world of Death Jr. in concept, execution is another story. DJ and his friends lack any real character or personalities. Their designs are meant to do the talking, and while I love the character designs, interactions with your friends are limited to text boxes with no spoken dialogue. Besides the beginning cinematic, we get a few cutscenes for the bosses, and a final cutscene which is just a parody of The Breakfast Club. I suppose everything truly is relative. I love the gameplay, while many have commented on how repetitive it is. Personally, I never found it monotonous, but it's also a handheld game, not meant to hold your attention for long bouts of time. I think Backbone found a perfect balance in the combat and platforming. When an eye gate stands between you and the goal, and the level suddenly becomes an arena, that's your invitation to wreak havoc and use these wacky level designs to your advantage. In the end, Death Jr. is worth checking out. I think it's an underrated classic for the PSP. I only wish that the developers at Backbone gave the game more of an identity. It's as simple as you can get in terms of story. Thankfully, the Death Jr. comic gives us the story that this game severely lacks. While there are similarities between the game and the comic's storyline, the comic expands on the world and gives all of the characters their own personalities. DJ is naive, not only in the sense that he's gullible and easily tricked by his Uncle Mullock, but also in the sense that he's much different than all the other kids. DJ can't understand why people would consider him a freak, and doesn't judge any of his friends for how they look, which is endearing. And yes, I did say Uncle Mullock. Of the many differences between the game and the comic book series, one of the largest is that DJ is the new kid at school in the comic. While this is never once alluded to in the game or the manual, it changes the whole dynamic of the friend group. While I always assumed DJ was the de facto leader of the group, the reality is that Pandora was the leader all along, which in this story and the game's direct sequel makes perfect sense. Pandora always takes charge. She isn't scared to stand up for her friends or even call them out when they start acting like jerks. Her being the damsel in the game undermines her character from the comic, but I suppose it's an appropriate time to talk about the other major changes the story has. DJ's father has an actual presence in the comic. He cares about his son, but is obviously getting to be at the end of his rope. We see DJ's mom as well, who, as I've said, is just a regular alive lady. Mullock is revealed to be DJ's uncle and the original Grim Reaper before Death took the title from his brother and sealed him away. Death, unlike Mullock, has a conscience and couldn't allow Pandemonium to reign supreme. In the biggest twist, DJ kills Pandora when she confronts him over his sudden character turn. Hoping to resurrect her without his dad's help, DJ rushes to the museum and frees his uncle, hoping he can help. This backfires in the most spectacular of ways, and when his dad is sealed in the very chest he put his own brother in, DJ has to save the day himself. At the end of the day, the positives definitely outweigh the negatives with this title. Never has another PSP game engaged me and kept me engaged for the entirety of its runtime. I could argue that owning a PSP is worth it for this game alone. Nowadays a PSP won't run you more than $80 and a used copy will cost about $20. Of course, emulation is also an option. I mean, I'm not gonna judge you. I made this video out of a place of love for the Death Jr. series. It makes me really sad to think nobody really talks about it anymore. No one really knows about it whenever I bring it up in conversations, at least. We're gonna have 2 more videos coming out in the near future. One on Death Jr. 2 Root of Evil, released for the PSP and the Wii, and then Death Jr. Science Fair of Doom for the DS. We're also gonna be looking at the second volume of Image Comics, also written by Gary Whitta.